If you guys are familiar with Gary Habermas and his minimal facts approach to the resurrection, Dr. Gary Habermas, that's essentially an abductive argument because he says, hey, here's the facts, the historical facts surrounding the resurrection. And then he asks the question, which theory best explains the facts? So that's an abductive argument. And also gave us different types of reasoning. Deductive is the most popular because, well, I say most popular like in apologetics and stuff at this point because, like he said, it does give you certainty. If you know your premises are true and their conclusion follows your premise, then you know your conclusion is true. And we do have very good deductive arguments.
So by those definitions, the argument for evolution would be extremely abductive.
Yes.
Yeah, abductive for sure. And pretty much, I don't want to say all of science, but most of science does rest on inductive reasoning, right? And there's even scientists who admit this because you don't know, just because the apple always falls from the tree doesn't prove that it always will. Does that make sense? It doesn't prove it. Now you have a probability that yeah, gravity will always be there, right? But you don't have the proof that that's always going to be the case, and that's why you have to have and Daniel could talk about this more than me probably, but that's why you have to have and the scientific enterprise you're supposed to have experiments that are repeatable, and every time I repeat it, I get the same result, right? And if I repeat it and don't get that result, then something's wrong. But
But
evolution is a
also,
great example of, hey, we have something that looks like this. This seems to be our best explanation, therefore it's true, which might not necessarily be the case.
but also in the scientific reasoning, they have to have a control. They have to have
Yeah.
a control. And so without control, they really can't give a high probability or make a good sound argument because they don't have control. That destabilizes the experiment.
Yeah, that's a great point. That happens sometimes too, especially with um certain fields. Um and there are abductive arguments in Christian apologetics as well. If you guys are familiar with Gary Habermas and his minimal facts approach to the resurrection, Dr. Gary Habermas, that's essentially an abductive argument because he says, hey, here's the facts, the historical facts surrounding the resurrection. And then he asks the question, which theory best explains the facts? So that's an abductive argument. I think, an abductive argument can be good. I think it's a good argument, but it doesn't carry the same weight as a deductive argument, right? But abductive arguments can be used, and they're becoming more popular for sure in Christian apologetics. There's a guy, I can't think of his name, but he got kind of famous for writing he does a lot of stuff with moral arguments, and he makes abductive moral arguments where he says, "Hey, the world looks this way. We have, everybody knows it's always wrong to murder. What's a better explanation of that? That we, came descended from the slime and over billions of years, became conscious and all this stuff, or that we're created in the image of God." And again, it's not as powerful, it's not as convincing as a deductive argument. But I would say it still works. But yeah, great book. I'm trying to see if I have it. Um, to show y'all. No, a great book on this if y'all ever, especially on scientific reasoning and some of the flaws, a great book on this is called How to Be an Atheist, and it's written by a guy named Mitch Stokes. Um, and it's really good. Here, I'll show you all. Let me just share with you guys the front cover of it so you can see what it looks like. Um, this book right here, How to Be an Atheist, Why Many Skeptics Aren't Skeptical Enough. by Mitch Stokes. And he just kind of shows how really the whole scientific enterprise depends on inductive arguments, and then kind of just shows you why that's not a good thing. And even there are and he's not an atheist though. He's a Christian. So it's it's kind of the title's kind of poking the bear a bit, but and he also does a great, but he's got mechanical engineering degrees and went to MIT and Harvard or wherever. And he makes a good point about David Hume, who's kind of the father of modern skepticism, loathed inductive reasoning and said it wasn't worth anything, but all of science is based on it. So there's a little bit of irony there.